Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This is episode 6 in the What the F moments of the Chris Watts case. In this episode we're looking at Nickole Atkinson, Shan'ann Watts' best friend. What they often say about friends is you can tell someone by their friends, and so we can also tell a lot more about Shan'ann and about what is going on in her life through Nickole Atkinson. From this point I'm going to refer to her as Nikki, and it's obviously a reference only to Nickole Atkinson, not the other Nickole in the story. So Nikki is really at the center of things from the get-go. She's there right at the beginning when the Ring doorbell camera picks up Shan'ann's last moments. It's the last footage we see of her alive, and so besides her killer, Nikki was the last person to see Shan'ann alive, and she was the first person to raise the alarm when she couldn't get hold of her the next morning. Nickole is there when she drops Shan'ann off. She's the first person to seem to realize that Shan'ann's missing. She's the person who calls the police. She is the first person besides Chris Watts and Officer Coonrod to enter the crime scene. She's the first member of the public essentially to investigate the crime scene. She heads to the neighbor, and she's also there when they're looking at the motion detector footage from the camera on Trisnastich's porch. She also kind of speaks to the neighbor about everything that's going on, and they talk about Chris's body language and how he's acting, and the neighbor also talks about how he's heard the couple shouting, and throughout the period where the officers are going through the house, Nikki is on the phone to Shan'ann's mother. Shan'ann's mother is giving her input, she's giving instructions, she's making suggestions, and a lot of the time Shan'ann's mother's on speaker, sort of making her feelings known. As useful and effective as Nickole's input in this case was, it's arguable that her son was even more of a hero. He ran around the house early on, looked around, and then he also then ran inside the house and looked around actively. He was sort of actively searching, and he seemed to sort of cotton on faster than anyone else that Chris Watts had something to hide, and he was going to find out what it was. And Chris Watts had hidden Shan'ann's phone on the couch, and and Nicholas found it, and then there was this sort of moment where, well, I don't know how to get into her phone, and then Nikki solved that problem as well, and she provided a password that worked, and the phone was opened, and people could then see what was going on in it. So Nikki was really there throughout, and was responsible for kind of fast-tracking the investigation into Chris Watts. Nickole said things weren't right inside the crime scene. she said that Shan'ann's OCD, and she would never have sort of left 3 beds unmade in the way that they weren't made. A lot of what I've mentioned here we all know, but it kind of all started with Nikki having kind of a bad feeling about what was going on. We're now going to sort of venture into a couple of areas that are maybe a little bit less well known about Nikki. She was annoyed when she had to give another interview. I think it was that night. She had to go to work, and she was quite annoyed by the fact that she had to sort of be, I don't want to say detained, but she had to set aside time for this interview. It was an interview with Greg Zentner from the CBI, the same agency that would obviously get really involved in everything. But basically what happened here was there was a very extended interview with Nickole Atkinson. It goes on for 72 pages, and I cover these in the Atkinson Transcripts on Crime Rocket. It's a 15-part series, which I will be doing a series on this channel after this series. But if we go to page 17 of the transcripts, they dated the 14th of August, so it looks like Nikki was interviewed on Tuesday night, the same time that Chris Watts was being interviewed, in the evening on Tuesday. And this is quite an extensive interview, as one can see by the length of it. But what is interesting is that Nikki wasn't very happy about it, and there's even a call where I think it was she was asked, and asked if she would be prepared to do the interview, and there was some shouting in the background, and it seemed like she was reluctant. I think she was concerned that she would get flack either from her husband or from her boss at work. She was doing a night shift, and the shift was starting at 6 p.m. At the Mesa Vista Nursing Home in Boulder, Colorado. And so that was where she was working when the idea was to go and talk to her. It seems like even though Detective Baumhover contacted her, in the end it was a CBI agent that actually was dispatched to talk to her. All of this is from page 555 and 556 in the discovery. From this we also have confirmation that Nikki was a CNA, which is a certified nursing assistant, and it's not completely clear whether Shan'ann was as well, but they certainly had that aspect in common, that there was a little bit of a nursing background that they shared. Not necessarily that Shan'ann was a nurse, but she certainly worked in a pediatric call center, possibly dispensing nursing advice or something like that. And she may have started a course in it as well. In any event, they had that in common, and they had other things in common as well, which we'll get to. But it is interesting that she was extremely angry and asked the detective repeatedly if she was going to be charged with a crime, if she came to the police department. That may sound crazy, but there's actually quite a lot of substance to that, in a way. and we'll deal with some of that in this episode. I won't go through it exhaustively, but there certainly is some reason why Nikki could have been in trouble. Seen from the perspective of law enforcement, Nikki was there all along. She was there, she dropped Shan'ann off, and she was there the next morning, and she was banging on the door and setting off alarms and trying to get in the house. And so although we know in hindsight that she was just being a friend, expressing concern, the police were sort of wondering, wow, you are really at the center of all this, what's going on? The fact that her son found the phone, on the one hand you can say was a great job, but on the other hand you can say, well, didn't he put it there? Didn't he have it, or whatever? So there was a little bit of suspicion around Nickole, and at that point obviously Chris Watts hadn't been arrested, so there may have been she may have been a distant second on the list of suspects. An interesting question that I think very few people know the real answer to is, why did Nikki go to the house that morning? Bear in mind she dropped Shan'ann off at almost 2 o'clock in the morning, so she herself had gotten home really, really late. So why is it that Nikki was also up fairly early, and because of that she was worried about Shan'ann fairly early in the day? Why? Right? In true crime you don't just ask a question like that and make assumptions. You ask a question like that and you go and check, and you try and make absolutely sure. And it may seem a simple question, and it may seem a simple question with a simple answer. Again, in true crime you don't make assumptions, you don't rely on gossip, you don't rely on what the media says, you try and get to the facts. And yeah, we have a couple of sources that one can use to get to the facts. You've got the generic discovery, which I've quoted, where Nikki didn't really want to talk to the law enforcement at that time. She kind of had to be at work. There's that version. Then there's the extensive interview with Nikki herself, the 72-page transcript, which I'm not sure how many people are aware of, but that makes for some interesting reading as well. Although that's the discovery, it's not strictly speaking part of the original discovery, and that was something that I raised a bit of a red flag with, and I sort of asked, why is Nikki's interview with the police missing? I mean, it's one of the most important aspects of the investigation. Why isn't it there? Why are there all these other interviews with Chris Watts' co-workers and with Shan'ann's fellow promoters? Cassie was there and everyone else. Why was all of that there, but arguably the most important interview wasn't there? Where was the interview with Nickole Atkinson? And so the absence of that was just very, very weird, and it did eventually come to light, but the fact is that it was never actually part of the original discovery. Why not? And so so I ended up doing quite a lot of my own investigative work, trying to just solve the simple question. Remember, this is before any of the discovery came out. whether it's the transcript or the original tranche of 1,960 pages. So I wanted to try and figure out, why was Nickole heading to the house? Why was Nikki going there? And there were some obvious assumptions to make. One was work. You know, she wanted to start, you know, the whole thriving thing, get back to work first thing in the morning. It didn't really make sense because you know, if she went to sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, was it really necessary to sort of be up at, you know, first thing? Was it you know, was it vital? Then there was also the doctor's appointment at 10 a.m. that Nikki was aware of, and Shan'ann was concerned about, and there was a lot to be concerned about. As we know now, Shan'ann was kind of being poisoned, and the health, not only of the fetus but of her, had been kind of undermined. So it would actually have been very interesting if she had made that doctor's appointment. What might he have said? Would he have taken a blood test? In any event, Nikki was concerned. She had a right to be concerned just about Shan'ann's health and her well-being. And so when she didn't hear back from her, there was cause for concern. That's still not addressing exactly why Nikki would have wanted to go to the house specifically. You know, she could have been concerned by making a call or texting or messaging her on Facebook. Why would she feel so compelled to actually go to the house? And there was another occasion where Shan'ann was out of sorts, where Nikki had said, well, you want me to come and, you know, support you and be with you, and Shan'ann had actually said, well, please don't come before a certain time, I kind of need a little bit of time to do X, Y, and Z. So in that instance she had actually said, you know, don't come early, you know. And so what emerges in the transcript, and as I said, this came through fairly late in the day, but what emerges in the transcript, and this is on page 17, is that Nikki texted her about her appointment and how her appointment went. And as it turned out, the first text she sent was at 8:55 in the morning, where Nickole asked Shan'ann if she was okay. Verbatim, she said, just wanted to see if you're okay. I know you were hurting a lot last night. I hope you're okay. Okay, and so that was at 5 to 9, and a relatively short sleep. You know, if one assumes that they got to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then around about half an hour later, Nikki texted her again to ask her, I guess, how the appointment went. And so at 9:21 she said, you know, let me know how your appointment goes. And obviously at this point there had been no response to the previous text, and Nikki didn't think that much of it. And then at 11:46 she texted again. So this was the third text at 11:46, and when Zentner asked Nikki, you know, was it unusual for her not to return texts? Nikki says, yes, very unusual. because of her business, because she communicates with everybody and she's constantly on Facebook. And that was the other thing, she didn't post on social media that morning. And so if you go back and look through her Facebook, she has posts anywhere from 5:30 to 7 in the morning, every single morning, every morning. So yeah, we have confirmation just of how habitual Shan'ann was in terms of her Facebook scheduling. And this seems to be an area that Chris Watts critically underestimated or something. Again, we don't know whether he meant to use her phone in a deceitful way, but then was sort of surprised that he was locked out of it. We don't know that when he was locked out, he just couldn't figure out the password. We don't know that. It's possible that he wasn't locked out and he just ran out of time because of the flight delay. It's one of the little lingering mysteries of this case. Did he know a password or didn't he? If he did, why didn't he, use her phone? Did he run out of time, or didn't he think about it? Did he forget? Was it a clumsy mistake? Right, all those kinds of things. On page 18, and again, we're trying to address the question of why was Nickole at the house? Why was she there? She says, when I looked on Facebook, because I hadn't been on Facebook either, I was actually I drove to Longmont around 10 o'clock to go look at a house for another gal that is with us in Arizona. Her name's Cassie. And they're supposed to be moving out here, and they were actually supposed to move in with the Watts family a month later, so in late September 2018, early October. And then Nikki says that she said to Cassie, I haven't heard from Shan'ann, have you? And Cassie said, no, I haven't either. She's not returning my phone calls or texts. And then they both called and texted her, and then at 11:46 Nikki texted, I'm very worried about you, I'm coming to your house. And this is where we get a voluntary kind of admission from Nickole why she went there, right? She says to the agent, and the reason I decided to go to her house was because I'd watched the dog, Dieter, the week before, and I didn't bother Chris because I knew he figured he was at work, but I figured maybe after he left for work she passed out or something. What she seems to be saying here is that she figured she could go to the house and she could even access the house without kind of asking anybody, which is a little bit mischievous if you think about it. If nothing was wrong, she was going to go to the house, possibly enter the house, look around, and decide for herself whether anything was wrong. If she'd succeeded, it could have been like breaking and entering. She's gaining access to the house, obviously with good intentions, or apparently with good intentions, but it does amount to unlawful entry. That's something that could have been argued in a trial if she had gained that kind of access, but she didn't because of the door latch. And that was something else I investigated. Was the door latch usually on, and so on. And so you kind of have these two versions. The one is that Nikki went to the house because she'd watched the dog. Another one is that she was worried because Shan'ann wasn't feeling well. And in previous What the F moment, we sort of dealt with Thrive. We dealt with the fact that Shan'ann, was she thriving or not? And here you have the situation of why was her friend so concerned about it, and it was because she wasn't feeling well. And Nickole may have misinterpreted the not feeling well. She may have thought it had something to do with the pregnancy. She may have thought it had something to do with lupus or even diabetes, and that was sort of something that she cited when she did the check well-being call. She said, you know, she's been diagnosed with lupus. She's been having trouble with diabetes, I think associated with pregnancy, and she was worried. What we know now is she probably had very good reason to worry, because Shan'ann's health had taken a turn for the worse. Shan'ann's health had been threatened because someone was trying to, you know, bring about a miscarriage. Someone was trying to maybe even kill her. So Nikki actually had excellent reason to worry about Shan'ann's health, and as it turned out, it was totally justified. Interestingly, she had a son with her and a 2-year-old daughter when she went to the house. And that brings us to another aspect that's really odd, and that is and I'm going to use a little bit of a reverse way of dealing with this. If you go to Cadle's book on Christopher Watts, and you go to chapter 12, and you go to, I think it's on page 75, it's a chapter dealing with the morning of the murders, and it, on the second sentence in that chapter, refers to Nickole and Shan'ann supposed to go to look for a car for her to rent through Thrive, right? It doesn't mention Nickole's name here directly. In fact, all over this chapter is the word she over and over again. She and Shan'ann, she had not heard from. That friend became very worried. Her friend was concerned. She tried to get in. She could see Shan'ann. So it's just expressed in a bit of a strange way, that obviously it's about Shan'ann's friend Nikki, and yet Cadle doesn't really refer to her by name, which just seems a little bit strange. But the reason given here is that she, being Nikki, was supposed to go look for a car for her to rent. Now, I don't know where Cadle got that information from. It's not in the original discovery, the 1,960 pages. It's also not from the interview with Agent Zentner. It's nowhere in those 72 pages. So where is Cadle getting information from? And I don't think Cadle's wrong. I think she's right, but the question is, where does she get the information from? And if you go to the Thrive event in San Diego, we see the confirmation that Nikki had won an auto bonus essentially 6 weeks earlier, and Shan'ann was kind of broaching it to everyone, like on social media, in a Facebook Live. She was sort of announcing to everyone that Nikki had just made 12k and she'd won her auto bonus. And so, yeah, 6 weeks earlier Nikki had gotten the auto bonus, but bear in mind that Shan'ann then basically wasn't around for the next 6 weeks, right? When Shan'ann arrived back on Sunday night, that was effectively going to be the first day of Shan'ann back to work, back to business as usual. And so that was also Nikki's first opportunity to also get what she wanted, which was to get the auto bonus. In other words, to go and go and look for cars, right? It's also, I think, important to stress here, even though it's Cadel saying this, the idea of looking for a car to rent through Thrive. So you're not getting a car. You're not. It's not like you are getting a brand new car. You are renting a car. You're paying for the lease of a vehicle, and Thrive is making allowances for that. They are giving like a car allowance for that, which is contingent and predicated on you continuing to hit certain targets. But the question is, where did Cadel get this information? And what I can tell you is, when I studied the arrest affidavit and all the information, became very clear that, and also the Facebook posts, it became clear that a couple of things, that Nikki's car had been hail damaged, something I've mentioned in previous posts on this channel. That was stated on her Facebook. She said that her car had been totaled by hail damage. We know that there were 2 fairly serious storms, I think in June. And so I wondered, did she get the new car? And that question really came about by asking another question, which was, which car were they driving in when Nikki dropped Shan'ann off that morning? What was the car that they were driving in? And it was hard to know whether it was Nikki's original car or whether it was some new car, some unknown new car that Nikki had gotten as a result of the auto bonus. And so I contacted Nikki on Facebook and I asked her, did you ever get the new car? And she said no. She was waiting for Shan'ann to get back. Shan'ann had been away for 6 weeks, and she was waiting for Shan'ann to get back so that they could go and look for a car. And so it actually seems like the day that Nikki went to the house was also the day that they were supposed to go car shopping, in inverted commas. It was the day that they were supposed to go and look for the car that they wanted. And that seemed to be kind of the reason that Nikki was more, what's the word? I think she had reason to be concerned, but the reason she actually went to the house was partially because on that day she'd been waiting to go and pick up her car, to go and get her car. And another way you can explain it is, if Nikki was concerned, she may have just arrived at the house, looked through the window and left, but she went away and came back. Her son looked through the little windows of the garage. And that was something else I wanted to check, was that was it possible to look into the garage? And so when I do look carefully at some of the media photos of the garage to see that there were little windows in the garage, that it was possible to look in through there. And so that was stuff that I managed to figure out before the discovery came out. It's just interesting that Cadel, whose book came out in October, references this thing about looking for a car. She doesn't mention anything about Crime Rocket, and she doesn't mention the book that I wrote that mentioned this, which is essentially the source of this information. So yeah, that's a bit of a mini what the F for me in terms of this. When Cadel refers to her research and her source material, it is I think it's the discovery and whatnot. There's absolutely no mention of Crime Rocket, which has provided the most extensive coverage of this case bar none. and certainly not of any of the books I've written. I don't think she's ever mentioned me or anything that I've written, which makes one wonder when you come across a piece of information like this, which you could only have gotten from me. Just makes one wonder, makes one wonder what's going on. I guess it is possible that she got the information from Nikki herself. Who knows? It's not certainly not, that information's not provided here. There's no asterisk saying how she knows this or anything like that. In any event, I don't want to make this about Cadel, and I don't want to make it about all of that. But another aspect that's strange is in the Thrive video, the Facebook Live video that Shan'ann shot on the roof of that building in San Diego, and incidentally Chris Watts was there as well. She talks about Nikki quitting her job of 14 years, and this was in late June. It was around about the 26th of June that Shan'ann made that video, and she explicitly mentions how Nikki is working full-time on this job, right, on Thrive. She'd quit her job of 14 years and she's now working full-time. And yet 6 weeks later, when the detective wants to talk to her, where is Nikki? She's going to work. She's going to do a night shift. So what happened to this thing, saying in public that she's working full-time on Thrive?
I'm sitting here at the pool with everybody. Woo! Hello! Hi! And Nikki just hit 12K. She just earned her car bonus.
I really don't want to give Nickole Atkinson a hard time. She's actually one of my favorite people in this case. She's the most, what you see is what you get. She's the most down to earth. She's, she's just, and they've got quite a sense of humor. When they house sat for Shan'ann, her son Nick would kind of rearrange things in the house. I think put pot plants in different places and whatever, and because they knew how OCD Shan'ann was, and so they were sort of not making fun of her, but they were sort of teasing her by putting things in different places, and that apparently took place when Shan'ann and Chris arrived back from North Carolina. The house had been somewhat changed because of them doing this stunt, and they wouldn't have known it, but they were basically leaving their fingerprints all over the place. And it's maybe funny or humorous in one sense, maybe not so funny in another sense, but it just shows the kind of sense of humor of the Atkinsons, which is gives a human element to these people that is somehow missing. What is less funny, I guess, is after Shan'ann's death, Nikki threw herself fully into the whole Thrive thing, and as far as I'm concerned, she sort of went over to the dark side, just in terms of you have Shan'ann dying, right, and Nikki doesn't seem to register the impact that Thrive had on that, and a lot of people don't, a lot of people won't. But I do remember quite early on, Nikki did say, you know, please get off your phones, please get off Facebook, and please just, you know, see your families around you. You know what I mean? She was sort of making the statement that let's learn a lesson from this, you know, get out of the funk that you're in by, you know, constantly being addicted to your phone, constantly being online, constantly whatever, and, you know, see your families, see these people for who they are, you know, see what is going on in your life. And while that was a moment of clarity, Nikki herself seemed to have sort of jumped in the deep end and gotten totally caught up in the whole Thrive thing. And a year later she's even had another child. You know, a year later she's kind of in a similar situation to the one that Shan'ann was in terms of thriving and pregnant and so on. Unlike Shan'ann, we don't have a clear indication of what level Nikki is at. Shan'ann on her Facebook profile identifies herself as an 80k Thrive promoter. That's her level. Nikki doesn't do that, so we don't really know, you know, what she achieved since last year. But according to her profile, she simply says she's a promoter at Lavelle and she started on May 9th. So effectively it took her a year to get to that 12k level. It would be interesting to know at what level she is now. It's also unclear whether she ever got that auto bonus, whether she ever, you know, got the new car or whatever it was. Another aspect that would be interesting just to get confirmation of on is, did Nickole inherit Shan'ann's Thrive product? Now, it looked like Shan'ann had huge amount of product in her basement. And what happened to it? What happened to Shan'ann's sort of inventory? Did it go to the Ruseks? Did it go to Nickole? You know, what happened? And I'm going to just finish this episode just by touching very quickly on the backstory. You know, how they met. And how they met was during the time when Shan'ann was struggling, when they were dealing with their bankruptcy. Her parents put their home on the market in Aberdeen, and they moved in with the Watts family. And during this period when the Ruseks were staying with the Watts family, Sandy found a job, and Sandy found a job working for or with Nikki as a hairdresser. And at that time Nikki was sort of running a bunch of salons, and so that's really how they met. Is Sandy worked for Nikki, and then around about that time Shan'ann recruited Nikki into her network. And that's really what happened. Shan'ann started thriving in January 2017, and Nikki was recruited by May 2017. And so, yeah, a year later Shan'ann had died, and Nikki had reached her auto bonus, which, as I said, doesn't look like she ever claimed. And so I'm going to put the ball in your court. What do you think is the biggest what the F in terms of Nikki? Is it the fact that she almost single-handedly got Chris Watts, you know, busted him, you know, got him right at the beginning? what do you think is the biggest WTF regarding Nikki? Please leave a comment, please like and share this video amongst your networks, and thank you for listening.
She's been working for over a year. She finally decided last month that she was going to go full-time working the business after leaving a job of, how many years were you there? 14 years, and decided to make this change and help people live the life they deserve. And within a month, she hit 12K.